This is Alan Jones on Trial, a new podcast by Guardian Australia, and I'm Nour Haydar, coming to you from Gadigal land. Week 2 of the trial ended with the testimony of the mother of one of Jones's complainants, who said she apologised to her son, known only as Jay, for not protecting him after he disclosed to her that the broadcaster had indecently assaulted him as a teenager. Now, another alleged victim is on the stand. Known as C, he's given the court a glimpse into the world of Alan Jones, what it was like to work for the talkback radio king as a young employee at 2GB, and the unwanted touching he alleges unfolded behind the scenes. Joining me each week is media correspondent Amanda Meade to unpack the proceedings at the Downing Centre courtroom. Today, we're looking at C's evidence, who was at times emotional and told the court that he had been groomed over the course of a decade. Amanda, there were many moments this week at court where you and I looked over at one another, eyes wide open. The sound of journalists typing reached a crescendo because of the evidence that was being given by Complainant C.
Some of the jaw-dropping moments came when the witness, known as Complainant C, became exasperated with the cross-examination, and he blurted out things like, "This was a man who was 40 years older than me, and I was groomed for 10 years. And we also got our first insight into Alan Jones's private life, his domestic situation, and the way he was treated inside 2GB.
Complainant C accounts for 8 of the 22 charges against Jones, dated over a 5-month period. And I want to work through the evidence in sequence. He began by telling the court that it was his dream to work at 2GB and that Jones was someone that he held in high regard. Can you talk to us about C? What can we say about who he is when he first met Jones and what he told the court he thought of him at the time?
Yeah, so C is quite different from Jay, who had never heard who Alan Jones was. C is somebody who didn't grow up in the media world, but he really wanted to be in the media world. His dad was a big Alan Jones fan. He grew up listening to Jones on the radio, and he really wanted to be part of that world. And he... The first time he met Jones, he said he was starstruck, and he was able to go home and tell his dad that he'd met, this man.
And he told the court that he first met Alan Jones at a work function after he got a job at 2GB. That was in the mid-2000s, but he later took a job and a position as Jones's driver a year or so later, where he began earning around $40,000 with him. And we'll get to the allegations in a moment, Amanda, but I want to talk about what C said about the work that he was required to perform for Jones in that role.
He started off at 2GB and he was earning about $25,000 a year. Jones offered him a job as a driver for $40,000 a year, as you said. Being the driver didn't involve just driving. It involved some duties at 2GB, but also some pretty menial household duties at Jones's apartment, which included ironing small garments, including his underpants and his handkerchiefs. And also at 2GB, he was expected to bring Jones his breakfast every morning. And this was some very interesting detail that he gave about the type of respect that Jones, enjoyed at 2GB. He would bring him his breakfast at the same time every day, 6:30 a.m. It was 2 boiled eggs and Bergen bread cut into soldiers. He was expected to bring it in on a tray with a cloth hanging over his arm. He would expect him to pick the tray up immediately that he'd finished his breakfast. And he said he would loiter around and wait until he could go in and snatch it away during a break. And if he didn't, he was berated by Jones.
I thought it was interesting. He also said that he was taking directions from Jones's butler.
Yes, yes. So in the domestic sphere, the butler who once worked for the royal family would give him directions on how to do the ironing or prepare the lunch or, do whatever household duties he had to do for Jones after the show.
C says that on one occasion he was requested to drive Jones to his property in Fitzroy Falls. We've heard about that property from the first complainant, from Complainant J. And he said that it was on a drive down to that property where the dynamic shifted between them. What did he say about that?
Yeah, so he talks about two kind of periods with Alan Jones. One where he was very quiet in the car, barely spoke to him. He really felt like he was a lowly servant, I guess. And then the next phase of Jones, which was to be very friendly and to enjoy banter, to tell jokes, to ask him about himself. And that kind of shift happened on this drive up to Fitzroy Falls in 2008, where C told the court that their relationship became a lot more friendly, jokey, and he felt this shift.
He used the word flirty to describe it.
Yes, he did. He did. That was the first time it came up. So he said he felt that Jones was flirting with him before he ever alleges that he touched him.
He then says that there was a moment in the car where Jones touched his knee, and from there the touching escalated. Can you talk to me about the alleged indecent assaults in the car?
Yes. So it started when Jones allegedly just touched his knee. But then over several days or weeks, that escalated into actually sliding his hand over his leg and touching his groin. He couldn't tell the court how many times this happened, but he said it was a lot. It was dozens over weeks, and that it was all a blur in the end, but that he didn't say anything. The prosecutor, Georgina Wright, asked him, "Why didn't you say anything?" And he said, "I was scared. My boss's hand was on my penis." At another stage, he said, "I'd never had a man touch me on the penis before. I'm not gay."
Some of the other alleged offences relate to kisses. What did C say about that?
He said that the kissing happened both in the lift at the Circular Quay apartment and then later at the lifts at 2GB. The first time it happened, he had driven Jones into the underground car park and the two men went up in the lift together. He was carrying a briefcase and Jones's jacket over his arm, and he said that he was basically trapped against the side of the lift and that Jones just came forward and kissed him on the mouth. He said, "I remember dropping my head and making it inaccessible for him to kiss me." And when he was giving this evidence, he was showing the court how he'd done it by dropping his head, moving his head side to side, and demonstrating how it looked, and he was very emotional at that stage.
He was at pains to stress that he didn't kiss him back, and that
Yes,
he felt that he did what he could to I guess avoid that advance.
that's right, and that he'd kept his mouth closed, he'd never kissed him back, but that he hadn't actually pushed him away.
And it was at that point, Amanda, that the prosecutor, Georgina Wright, asked him why he never told the butler about what was happening, or why he never tried to physically stop Jones from touching or kissing him. And I thought his answers were interesting because he spoke about how Alan's power and status in his industry deterred him.
Yes. He said it at various times. Alan Jones was the most powerful man in Australia. He was extremely influential in media, in politics, in state politics. And he kept trying to explain the power dynamic at the time, because we're talking about, 20 years ago. And he kept saying, "This guy was my boss. I couldn't say no." He couldn't tell the butler. The butler was very professional and very, very much Alan Jones's servant. He wasn't going to confide in him. And he said he never felt like he could say, "Stop it, I don't like it."
Amanda, one alleged indecent assault took place at a restaurant on the Lower North Shore, and that has been the focus of cross-examination as well. Can you start by telling me what C said happened at this lunch and who else was there?
It was the first time that he alleges anyone else saw Alan Jones touch him. There was some big names there, and he says that he was directed by Jones to sit next to him. He sat next to him at this lunch. Jones held court talking, but that the whole time his hand was allegedly on his leg or on his groin. He said that he didn't want to attract attention to himself by pushing him away, and there was nothing he could do. But he said he realised that other people at the lunch, or two in particular, could see what was happening, and that they looked him in the eye and kind of smirked, and he felt deeply, deeply embarrassed. He said it was absolutely mortifying.
And there was a comment that was made to him, he says.
There was a comment that was made to him afterwards as they went back to the car, and I think these two will come and give evidence. And apparently one of them said words to the effect of, "I saw you copped a feel under the table. Did you enjoy it?"
Mm.
And he said he was so mortified that he didn't actually answer, or maybe he just laughed it off because that was all he knew how to do.
So, Amanda, beyond the alleged touching in the car, the kisses in the lift, the incident at the restaurant, we also heard about one incident that allegedly happened in Melbourne. It is important to emphasise that this is an uncharged act. So my question is, what does that mean and why has it come up in this trial?
Yes, it's not one of the charges. It is in a different jurisdiction, but the prosecutors wanted to include it because they said it showed context. This was a few years after he stopped working for Jones, and he was in Melbourne for a sporting event, and a friend of his suggested that they go and visit Alan Jones, who was staying in the Crown Towers Hotel. And one of the reasons they wanted to go, or his friend wanted to go, was because this was the suite, James Packer's personal suite. So it was going to be very fancy, and they wanted to go up there on a Friday night and have a look around. Complainant C said that Jones asked him if he wanted to go on a tour of the suite, and he said sure, and they left his friend in the lounge room. But they walked into what he described as a large walk-in wardrobe. And he said Jones walked in first and he walked in behind him. And then he suddenly said to him, "I've really missed you." And he kissed me. They said, "What did you do?" And he said, "I actually pushed him back. He was very close to my body, but I put two hands on him and pushed him back and said, 'Let's go back to my friend.'" He never told his friend what happened after that.
Okay, so that was the substance of the evidence in chief from Complainant C. Unlike Complainant J, C said that he did confide in a number of people, in friends, in colleagues, with family members around 2010 about the alleged sexual touching. And one conversation in particular, Amanda, stood out, and that was a conversation that he had with his father-in-law. Can you tell us about that?
He said that he had sort of casual conversations with friends over the years where he would just throw in that, "Yeah, you don't know what he used to do to me. He used to grab me on the cock, he used to touch me, he's a grub," things like that. But then he had kind of a serious conversation with his father-in-law after he'd already had a child. And his father-in-law said to him, Harvey Weinstein was in the news, and his father-in-law said to him, "These people are making up claims about what Harvey Weinstein did to them. They waited years to tell about it, and now they're just saying it to make money or to make a name for themselves. And that triggered him. And he said to his father-in-law, now is probably a good time to tell you that Alan Jones touched me. And I never said anything at the time because, I'm the father of your grandchild and I don't want my name out there. And that his father-in-law very quickly backed off, apologised and said, I'm really sorry that happened to you.
Aside from his father-in-law, he also disclosed to another high-profile media figure, and that was Ray Hadley, who hosted another program at 2GB at the time. That'll likely, Amanda, end up being quite a significant or relevant part of this trial, won't it?
Yes, it'll be important because the defence has already signalled that they are going to argue that Ray Hadley played a role in this, that he somehow encouraged at least this alleged victim to report it. And yes, he will be called possibly as early as next week. Also, the disclosure to Ray Hadley is really interesting because C told the court that it was the first time he really spoke from the heart and explained what had happened to him rather than sort of off-the-cuff comments to friends or that retort to his father-in-law. He said he was in Ray Hadley's office and he told him that Jones touched him on the penis and tried to and kissed him. And then he said that Hadley was in contact with Peter Fitzsimons, a journalist from the Sydney Morning Herald, who was investigating a story around allegations against Alan Jones. And he said, would you like to talk to him? And so they called him together. He handed the phone to him. C told the court that Jones had kissed and touched him, but he said, I don't want to be involved in the story. And at the time, Fitzsimons didn't even know who he was or who he worked for or anything like that. But there was some quite emotional evidence after this where he said, I broke down and I said, he's an effing grub. He used to grab me on the cock and he used to kiss me. He said he broke down sobbing in front of Ray Hadley. Ray offered to go with him to police or to report it to 2GB, but he said, no, absolutely not. And he made Ray promise that he would never tell anyone.
It was not long after that Kate McClymont from the Sydney Morning Herald contacted him.
I think she sent him an email. And he spoke to her, they met up, he spoke to her and he agreed to go on the record about what had happened to him, but to remain anonymous. So they made up a name for him in her story.
As we record, the cross-examination of C is still underway. That means Jones's barrister has the opportunity to ask C questions about his recollection of these alleged encounters and cast doubt over his claims. And there's been some focus, Amanda, on the allegations at the lunch.
This is where these things really get down into the weeds, about where did you park? How big was the car park? Are you sure it was this restaurant? Where did you sit? And these events are 20 years ago. So, anybody would be stretching their memory to try and remember. But it's the defence's job to pick holes in the testimony and to point out the differences between what he said in his police statement and what he said in his evidence in chief. One of the things was, which restaurant was it on the Lower North Shore? And they named two restaurants. He said it was one. They suggested perhaps it was the other. In his evidence, he said Jones directed him to sit next to him. Bashir suggested that he wasn't told where to sit. She also questioned whether anything was really said in the parking garage where they parked. Where was it? How big was it? That sort of thing. So Bashir was casting doubt on whether anybody actually saw the alleged indecent assault under the table. He has said that people saw and people even commented on it, but Bashir has said that there may be some conflicting evidence coming up.
Amanda, at times C got visibly agitated with the cross-examination from Gabriel Bashir. How did he respond to the way that the defence sought to cast his at times friendly text messages, at times explicit text messages between himself and Jones?
So he continued to have this kind of flirty, sexually explicit texting relationship with Jones years after he stopped working for him. So this is something that the defence is really, drilling into. Why did he do this if he was in fact assaulted? So she kept saying, you wouldn't talk to somebody like this, who you allege has indeed indecently assaulted you. And the texts were, a lot of them were discussing C's penis, how big it is, his nickname Donkey. And some of the texts that the defence dug up were actually instigated by C and were not just responses. I miss you. It was great to see you today. This is from C to Jones. Some of them were contradictory. He'd given evidence that when he met up with Jones, he felt extremely anxious and uncomfortable. This is years later. But then they found a text on the day where he met up with Jones and told him afterwards, how wonderful it was to see him and how lovely, it was to hear his voice and things like that. So they're like, where were you lying in the text or in your evidence?
And this is, Amanda, when C pushed back.
Yes, he did. He was almost snapping back, saying, I was a junior staffer 40 years younger than him. Of course I didn't want this. This was just the way that I was supposed to talk to him. I was groomed by this man for 10 years. I thought that this was an acceptable way to talk, which was a very powerful moment.
And just finally, Amanda, one of the threads in the line of questioning from the defence to both Complainant J and Complainant C has been the suggestion that they've been financially motivated to make these claims. C was asked by Bashir whether he had sought legal advice about a civil case.
Yes, Bashir asked him if the police had discussed any civil remedies with him, and he said, yes, they did, but I already know that that's possible. Like, that wasn't news to me. And then she said, did you ever seek legal advice? And he said, no. So we don't know where this is going, but she appears to be suggesting there was a financial motive.
C was asked by Bashir whether he had sought legal advice about launching a civil case.
Yes, she asked him directly if he'd ever sought legal advice, and he said no. But she also raised the kissing in the lift, and she said, you do realise that if something like this happens in the workplace, that you have a claim against the employer. And he said, yes, I know that. And then she suggested that he'd made up the kissing in the lift so that he could, take advantage of that with a civil claim against the owner of the radio station. And she also was going to the fact that there were several hundred people who worked in that building and that the lifts were full of people at lunchtime when they were going down, and how could it ever have happened, as he said.
Amanda, C is still in cross-examination as we're recording. He'll likely be re-examined by the prosecution, and then where to from there?
We'll start to get C's witnesses now, because as we've seen, they're going complainant and then their witnesses, and the next complainant and their witnesses. We have heard that there are as many as 20 witnesses for this complainant alone, which makes sense because he told a lot of people what allegedly happened to him. And also there are all the media witnesses. We've heard that Kate McClymont, Peter Fitzsimons will be called, and presumably the Ray Hadley and friends and maybe family. So that there's a lot, and we should see that next week.
Okay, Amanda, I'll let you head back down to the Downing Centre. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nour.
You can read the latest from the courtroom on theguardian.com, and if this episode has raised anything for you, help is available. You can contact the National Family, Domestic and Sexual Violence Counselling Service on 1800-RESPECT. That's 1800-737-732 and Lifeline on 13 11 14. The series producer is Taylor Strano. Sound design and mixing by Jacob Round. Video production by Lachlan Monstead. Our theme music is by Joe Koning. The executive producers of Alan Jones on Trial are Hannah Parks and Shelley Hepworth. Don't forget to subscribe or follow Alan Jones on Trial wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Nour Haydar. Catch you next week.